Today's Gemara Megillah Daf Yomi. So learning for this month, the month of Teves, has been generously sponsored by close friends of the Daf, the Zecher Nishmas of Arlei ben Rav Yaakov Zatzal, whose yard site was on Aleph Teves, Mir Tashem, the learning of the entire Chabura. As we learned the other day, Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the incredible Megillah of Torah, should be an incredible schos for Arlei ben Rav Yaakov as he's oila higher and higher in his place in Gan Eden Shal Megillah. As well as learning should be as Choshidah V'Zochaim and Devar Shemir Ras. It's a good Shanalis with Shanamak Lemorcha B'Savashinta, it's a good B'Savashinta Shavim and Chayal Shlomo ben Levi Zahava. As well as learning should be as Chos for Shemish Milius ben Neveda Meni Vivegel Chaim Yasar Shem Zibra Yisas Zor Baskanandi to Basim as Chaysay Yisam Mendel as Zibra Shalea. Shlomo Bas Naomi B'Shavei Shechan Shmo Ben Tila Din Charizim Chayv Asmina Dinina V'Shinminda Shliv and Figedvera Rivka Bas B'Shavin Atalzim and Chlas Emmer Ben Nakot B'Soch Shar Chayle Yisrael. We pick it up on the bottom of Yud Ches Amid Beis. We are 4 lines into the wide lines. We started a discussion yesterday about whether you're allowed to write Torah from your mind, whether it could be Baal Peh, or whether any time you're writing a pasuk, you have to record and transcribe it from looking at another pasuk in a Chumash or a Torah nearby. So says the Gemara, Gufa, Amar Rabbi Achana, Amar Rav Yechon. Again, we're 4 lines into the wide lines of Yud Ches Amid Beis. Says Rabbi Achana in the name of Rav Yechon, Asar lichtoi v'yisacha shleim ben aksaf. It's forbidden. You're not allowed to write even one letter Shalom and Aksav, unless you're reading it from another text. Meisvei asked the Gemara, Rav Shemin Elazar, Rav Meir, there's a story with Rav Meir, Shalach La'avar, Shana, Ba'asya, he was on his way to make a leap year in Asya, V'leisha Megillah, and it was Purim time, he had no Megillah. So what did he do? V'kazami Libai, he remembered, he knew the whole Megillah Baal Peh, and he wrote out the whole Megillah, V'kara, and he read it. So ask the Gemara, we see clearly you're allowed to write a Megillah Baal Peh, as Rav Meir himself did it. Answers the Gemara, Amar Rav Avua, Shani Rav Meir, the Mekayim Bey. Rav Meir is different. With regard to Rav Meir, the pasuk says, Avavecha Yashir Negdecha. Your pupils should look straight in front of you. And Amar Lei, what does that mean? What does that pasuk refer to? Amar Lo Ilu Divrei Torah. These are words of Torah. What does it say about the Torah? That you close your eyes and you forget it. If for one moment you stop thinking of Torah, you forget it. Which, by the way, let's just point out, tremendous consolation. We forget Gemaras, we forget Daf Gemara, and we get despaired. No, don't be despaired. That's the nature. The nature of Torah is, unfortunately, you forget it. What's the Eitzah? The Eitzah is like the pasuk itself says, don't move your eyes from it. Always chazer, always be on top of it. And then you have that siyata dishmaya like we've spoken about. But says the Gemara, Torah you quickly forget. Vafilu achi, with regard to Rameir, Miyusharin Hain, they were straight in front of him, Eitel Rameir. So answers the Gemara, don't ask me questions from Rameir. Rameir without a text is as if us with a text, who's all clearly in front of him, even though he had no text. That's why he was able to write it. Baal Peh. Ask the Gemara, Rav Chisda Ashkel Rav Chananel Davikos of Sfarim. Rav Chisda found Rav Chananel was writing Sfarim Shalom and Eksav. Again, he was writing it Baal Peh. And Amar Lei, Rav Chisda says, Rav Chananel Rukla Tarkula Lichtlav Al Picha. The entire Torah could be written from your memory. Meaning, Rav Chisda says, Rav Chananel, it's true. You know everything. It's true. You can write everything. However, Kach Amru Chachamim. What do the Chachamim teach us? Asar Lichtlav Isach Shleim and Aksav. You can't write one letter. So what do we see from this story? We see that Rav Chisda said to Rav Chananel, it's true. You know everything. It's all in front of you, but it's still forbidden. So how could the Marav said a moment ago that Rav Meir, because it was so clear in front of him, it's allowed? We see clearly from this story, not that way. Answers the Gemara, 5 lines. In the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom speaks out what we just said. From the fact that Rav Chisda said to Rav Chananel, the entire Torah could be written by you. It must be that it was clear in front of him, just like Rav Meir. And yet, Rav Meir kasav. So how did Rav Meir do it? We see clearly from Rav Chisda, from Rav Chananel, that it's not allowed. Rav Chisda's question to Rav Chananel. So how did Rav Meir go and write the whole Torah, the whole Megillah, from memory? Answers the Gemara. The answer I'm sure many people are thinking right now. Shas hadchak shiny. That was the Shas Adchak. Rameir was on the road. He went to make a leap year. He had nothing else. Different rules in such a scenario. Says the Gemara, a story 4 lines on the bottom of the Amid Yirchasim Beis. Avay Yishar L'Tvei. Bar Chavu, Abaye allowed the people in the house of Chavu Lemichtav Tefillin Mezuzah Shleim and Aksav to write Tefillin and Mezuzahs by heart. Kiman asked the Gemara, Ki Otanya, like we learned in the Mishnah, the Tanner of Yirmiyah Omer Mishum Rabbeinu. Tefillin and Mezuzahs Nechlav Shleim and Aksav, they're allowed to be written by heart. Vein Tzrichai Sirtut, and they do not need to have any etching into the lines. Sirtut is when you see a piece of cloth, you look at a Sefer Torah, the lines that they etch in with the knife, that is the Sirtut, that is the lines. So says that this Mishnah, Tefillin and Mezuzahs, you're allowed to write from memory, and they do not need sirtut. But says the Gemara, 2 lines to the bottom, you know what the halach is? Really, tefillin ain't tzrichin sirtut, but mezuzah tzrichin sirtut. But ID v'ID nechtav v'shlam and aksav, they're both allowed to be written by heart. Why? My time of Migras Gersinan, because these are things that are fluent, we know them all. These are the parshas of Shema, and that's how the Gemara concludes that tefillin and mezuzahs, we agree, could be written by heart, but other elements of the Torah shenat, unless it's a time of Shas Adchak. Says the Gemara on the last line of Yechasim Abeis, so the Mishnah said that if you wrote the Megillah with Sam, says the Gemara, what is Sam? Sum up. Sam is Sama, it's an orpiment, it's called Sikra. What is Sikra? Amar Rabbi Achana, Sikra Shema, it's called Sikra. What is Kumus? Kuma, it's the sap from a tree. As we turn over to today's daf, Yutesam and Aleph. What is Kankasum? It's Charsa. Doshpachi, which is a shoemaker's dye, a certain type of dye that the shoemakers used to use. Diphthera, what is Diphthera? It's a type of paper. Demaliach v'kamiach, that the paper is treated with flour and water and salt, but it's not treated with gall nuts, which is the final process of the paper. And niyar, what is niyar? Michka, which is papyrus. And those were all the items that the Mishnah said you're not allowed to write the Megillah with. What you have to write the Megillah says right now on the top of Yutesam Beis, 2 lines, Yutesam Aleph, 2 lines down. Why? As we've learned, Ala Sefer b'diyai, as we read on a Sefer on parchment with ubediyai, and with the special type of ink that we write Sefer Torah with. Minalan. Says the Gemara, Ksiva, it says over here, Esther Malka wrote down, and it says over there, Baruch, Mipiv Yikare, and it says over there, and Baruch said to them, Mipiv Yikare, from his mouth he said, he lied to me, as Kola Dvarim Eilu, all these words, Vanikoisev Al HaSefer B'diyai. So the pasuk in Yirmiyahu, clearly says, as we read on parchment, Ub'diyai, and with the special link. And now we continue on Yitesam and Aleph, halachas of reading the Megillah. This Mishnah is a Mishnah that's very relevant here in Eretz Yisrael, in which we have the concept of a ben krach. As we learned back in the first parak, the ben krach, the walled cities read when? On the 15th. Everyone else reads on the 14th. Here in Yerushalayim, we read on the 15th. In Bnei Brak, in Tel Aviv, in Beit Shemesh, in New York, you read on the 14th. Just to play it out, this year, Purim in America is going to be on a Thursday. Tainus Esther is Wednesday. You read Megillah on Wednesday night and Thursday morning. In Yerushalayim, it's not true. Wednesday night and Thursday morning, you do not read the Megillah. You read it because that's the 14th of Adar. When do you read it? Thursday night and Friday morning on the 15th of Adar. But now the question is a very prevalent question, here. Happens all the time. What if you travel? What if you go, someone who usually reads on the 14th, and you travel to someone who reads on the 15th? For example, someone in Bnei Brak comes here to Yerushalayim, or vice versa. Someone here in Yerushalayim goes to Bnei Brak, or goes to Beit Shemesh. Do you have to hear the Megillah? Do you have to have Mishlach Manos? Do you have to do Matanas Leviyanim? Is it Purim? You're in a place that's Purim. Just let's grasp the concept before we see the Mishnah inside. It'll hopefully make everything simpler. You live here in Yerushalayim, Purim is on Friday. So, but on Thursday, you go to Beit Shemesh. In Beit Shemesh, it's Purim right now, because it's called a regular 14th. It's Purim, but for you, you don't live there. So is it Purim for you or not? Do you have to hear the Megillah? You have to have the Suda? Says the Mishnah, let's get into it. Someone who lives in a city that goes to a krach, a walled city. Someone who reads in the 14th that comes to a place that reads in the 15th. Or vice versa. Says the Mishnah, what's the halach? If you're going to go back home, if I go to Beit Shemesh on Thursday, but I'm coming back here to Yerushalayim, I read it like my place. I read the Megillah on the 15th in Yerushalayim. You read with them. And the truth is, we don't have time to discuss this now, but this line, is a very large machlekes, Chazon Ish B'Shtabura. What exactly does it mean? Asid Lachzar doesn't mean that, in the most prevalent halacha, It's getting late, but just to point out, is it has to be where do you have intention to be come the morning. So if I go to Beit Shemesh and I don't intend to be there the next morning, then it would be that I retain my status because I plan on going home, Asir Lachzar, and I would read it like here on the 15th, like a walled city in Yerushalayim. Let's continue. Says the Mishnah, from where do you have to read the Megillah? How much you have to read? We know the whole Megillah, but that's the Mishnah. How much you have to read? To be his obligation. Rameir Aimer Kula, the whole Megillah. Rav Yehuda Amer Mi'ish Yehudi, and Rav Yosi Amer Machar Dvar Ma'ila, and we'll see in the Gemara a fourth opinion as well. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav, the din in the Mishnah that you're traveling from place to place. Says the Mishnah, the din is only if you're going to turn back on the 14th. That if you go to the walled city and you're coming back on the 14th, you have a status of a walled city, then you're going to read it with them. If you're not going to come back, then you have to read it with them. Amar Rav, we know this. The pasuk says, the pasuk says, those of the unwalled cities who dwell in the unwalled cities. I don't understand. Ask the Gemara. That's redundant. It says the same thing twice. You live in a walled city and you're in an unwalled city. Obviously, Hakamashman explains the Gemara. You know what the chiddush is? The paras ben yaimai nikri paras. That even if you're in an unwalled city for one day, you're in the 14th for one day, then you have the status of there. And that's why if you travel out to Beit Shemesh and you're going to be there at night, says the Gemara, you have to read with them. Asks the Gemara 1 second, Ashkaz paras. We see a source, we see a pasuk that talks about an unwalled city. Mukaf minol, and what's the source that the same thing applies? Vice versa. If you go to a walled city, answers the Gemara, Svaru. It's a logic. Midaparas ben yamai karapazuz mukaf ben yamai kari mukaf, and this is one of the many places that we see the incredible power of a svara. Says the Gemara, we have a pasuk about an unwalled city and a mere svara, and I shouldn't say mere, but the svara itself, svara hi lamali kra. Why do we need a pasuk? Teaches us that the same thing applies to the walled city. Says the Gemara, now we're going to go back to something that we learned back 2.5 weeks ago, back in Daf Yomi Aleph. If a ben kfar, a villager, when does the villager read? Let's remember Daf Beis. He reads on Yom HaKnisa. He reads earlier. Why does he read earlier? For cause they didn't know how to read, so they went to the big cities on Mondays and Thursdays. And number 2, so he's free to supply food, as we learned in the first parak, to the people of the larger cities. But let's say he's there. If he's in the big city, then whether he's going to be there or not, he's allowed to read, or he should read with them. My time, what's the reason? Says the Gemara, because really he's supposed to read then. This is really a bit of a chazara, that which we saw in the first parak. This person is supposed to read on the 14th. There was a special leniency, a special dispensation. Why? As we learned, so they could be free on the 14th to give them food. But that's when you're in your own city. So now we give you the special leniency to read it early on the Yom HaKnisa, to be makdim on Monday and Thursday. But if you're in the big city, you read with them. Asks Abaye 1 second. What do we see in the Braisa? Ben krach. First of all, Abai explains, what does ben krach mean? What do you mean? The Mishnah taught us has to do if you're going to come back home. So what does this price mean? It doesn't mean ben krach. Elalav ben kfar. Well, after Rutzik commentates, says the Gemara, it's really referring to a ben kfar. So what's the problem? And we see that it has to do with Shalach Le'ir, regardless, you read like your place back home. And you just told me if you're hanging out in the city, you're going to read with them. Answers the Gemara, Terutze, Valav Terutze Mitaretzta, once you're changing the text of the Brisa, Tana, Kaire Imayim. Once you change...
Connecting to the internet. It looks like an issue with the router and echo device, so try restarting them. Unplug both of them, then plug the router back in. Wait 30 seconds. Once the router is back on and connected to the internet, plug in the echo device.
Once you change the wording of the Brisa, says the Gemara, change another word. Once you're changing ben krach to ben ir, then what should we do? Change the word Once you're changing ben ir to ben krach, then change the word to mean kaire imahen, not that you read like your place back home. Says the Gemara. Now let's discuss the end of the Mishnah. Megillah, from where? Which point of the Megillah are you obligated to read? We're about 10 lines from the medium-sized lines. Tanya learned in the Brayso Rashbi Omer mi balaylahu. You have to start from balaylahu nadada. Amar Rav Yochanan v'kula mikra echad darshu. So Rashbi, by the way, that's the fourth opinion that we mentioned onto the Mishnah. Says Rav Yochanan, all four opinions are learning one pasuk. What does the pasuk say? V'tichtav Esra Malka Mordechai Yehudi is called Toikef. That Esra Malka and Mordechai Yehudi wrote as called Toikef all the acts of Toikef of power. Man Amar Kula, you have to read the whole thing. Toikef Shal Achashverosh. It means they wrote down the power of Achashverosh, which is prevalent in the entirety of the Megillah. Man Amar Mesh Yehudi Toikef Shal Mordechai. It means the power of Mordechai. Man Amar Chadvar Meila Toikef Shal Haman. Man Amar Bailu Toikef Shal Nei. So the four opinions are learning from the fact that Esra Malka Mordechai wrote the Toikef, the Nes, the power, and what's that power referencing to? Rav Huna Amar Meacha, different pasuk. Says the pasuk, for a reason do they see fit to do this, and what happened to them? So a cause and effect. Why did they do this, and what was the result? Man, Damar Kuli, you have to read the whole Megillah. What does this pasuk refer to? Why did Achashverosh use the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash? Al kacha misham dechashiv shivim shnein v'lo yafrik. The reason being, what was the cause? He thought that 70 years ended, and he wasn't, and they're not redeemed. And what was the reaction? What was the effect of that? On the first medium line, the Katel Vashti. Vashti was killed. How do we explain the pasuk? Mara Mordechai Dikni Bahaman. Why did Mordechai see to provoke Haman? Al kacha deshavin avshei avodah zara. What's the reason? Because Haman made himself into avodah zara. And what happened is Rachesh Nisa. The miracle occurred. How do we dash in the pasuk? What did Haman see that he got angry at the Jews? Al kacha, because of this. That what? Because Mordechai didn't bow down. What happened? They hung Haman on the tree. According to the fourth man, according to Rashbi, why did Achashverosh all of a sudden bring the book of Chronicles like we saw a few days ago? Al kacha, because of this. Because Esther invited Haman to the party. What happened is Rachesh Nisa, a miracle occurred, and those are the different ways of darshing the pasuk to learn how you have to read the Megillah. Like we know, you have to read the entire Megillah. But and we've seen this already, and even according to the opinion that says you don't have to read the whole Megillah, but very important clause. The entirety of the Megillah has to be written in front of you. You cannot have half of a Megillah. Megillah is called a sefer. It's called a letter. On the last medium-sized line, Nikra is sefer that what? If it's sewed up with linen, it's possible it has to be sewn up with gidin, with sinews. That if there's 3 stitches, as we'll see what this means in a moment, if there's 3 stitches, and even though a Torah has to be stitched all the way, but if the Megillah has 3 stitches, that's going to be enough. Why? Because it's called a letter. Amar Rav Nachman, he qualifies further, it has to be trisected, it has to be an even distance throughout the whole thing. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, 2 lines at the bottom of the Amud. Hakayir ben Megillah, Haksuva ben Haksuvim lo yatsa. New statement. You have many ksuvim written together. Megillah Esther is one of the ksuvim. So if you read the Megillah from a parchment, a Megillah that's written together with all the ksuvim, one large scroll that has all the ksuvim, including the Megillah, says Rav Yehuda Shmuel Layatzi na Yotzi Amar Rava Layamar Naldla Mechatzer Miyasra Port. That's only if it's not recognizable. But if the parchment of the Megillah is a bit smaller, you have this big ksuvim, and it gets the Megillah, it's a smaller parchment, just happens to all be sewn together, then Avu Mechatzer Miyasra Port Let's Lamba. It is no problem. Says the Gemara, Levi Bar Shmuel, the Kakari Kamed Rav Yehuda ben Megillah. Levi Bar Shmuel was reading the Megillah in front of Rav Yehuda with a Megillah. As we turn over to Yutesim Ebeis, Haksuva ben Haksuvim. He was indeed had such a Megillah of the Ksuvim amongst the Ksuvim. That's what he was reading. Amar Lei, Rav Yehuda says, Amar Akar Megillah Ksuvim Ksuvim Layatz. Rav Yehuda says to him, Rav Yehuda says to him, but you're not Yaitse. Amar Rav Chia. And and that's the end of the story. So what do we see? The Rav Yehuda says it's not good that what you did, Levi. Says the Gemara, another opinion. And what happened? He hit it on his head, meaning he shrunk down the din. The din is if it's written amongst the ksuvim, you're not yotze. Now let's minimize that din a little bit. B'tziber shani. That's only if you read in public. But if you read in private, your own personal reading, it could be a Megillah that's written amongst the ksuvim. Says the Gemara, the amount that you don't sew when it comes to Sefer Torah and you're sewing up all different pieces of parchment, how much you sew to the top. So you're supposed to leave a little bit on top and bottom open. That amount is a halacha l'Moshe misinai, and similarly machla amucha, they minimize this din. The whole reason is so it should not rip. But let's say it was sewn up all the way. The problem is that it's going to rip because it doesn't have any give. Therefore, if you pull the parchment, it's going to cause it to rip. And therefore, what's the halacha? You're supposed to leave open a blank space on top and bottom. Again, a blank part that's not sewn. If there was a little hole in the cave in which Moshe Nebuah stood, when the Shechina itself passed by, machat sidkes, the amount of a needle hole space, no one would be able to stand because of the light of a Kadosh Baruch Hu himself that passed by. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, Ki lo yareni adam achai, no one could see me and live. And finally, and again, of course, we have all these statements because they're all made by Rav Chia bar Abba. Finally, the Gemara says, what is the meaning of the pasuk that says, and the writing on the luchais was like all the words that like Hashem spoke with them, on the mountain. This teaches us Hashem himself showed Moshe Rabbeinu all the fine interpretations of the Torah, all the dikdukim, and even thousands of years later, a Sefer Talmud Chacham is going to be Machadesh, Mikra Megillah. And what is that? That is Mikra Megillah, the Chiddush of the Chacham. They created a new part of the Ksubim. So Moshe Rabbeinu was privy to be shown by Hashem himself that in the future there's going to be an enactment of Mikra Megillah. Says the Mishnah on Yetesima base. Anyone can read the Megillah aside for a cherish, someone who's deaf, a shaita, someone who's a deaf mute, deranged, the katan a minor. Rav Yehuda says a katan could indeed read the Megillah. Says the Gemara, man tana cherish di'avinamilai. Who is the tana in the Mishnah that when it says a cherish, a deaf person, is not allowed to even read the Megillah? B'di'avet, it doesn't work. Amar Ramasna Rav Yosi, the Tanana Kari says Shema. When you read Shema, we saw part of this a few days ago. Yatsa. If you don't hear what you're saying by Shema, it's okay. But Rav Yosi Omer lo yatsa. Says the Gemara, so similarly we want to say that just like Rav Yosi says, if you don't hear the words when it comes to Shema, you're not Yaitse. So too, if you don't hear the words of the Megillah, you're not Yaitse. So if someone is a Cherish that you're not going to be able to hear the words, therefore it's not going to be Yaitse, the mitzvah. Ask the Gemara, how do you know that the Mishnah is Rav Yosi's opinion? And it's teaching us that even b'diavad, even ex post facto, even if you did it already, you're not Yaitse. Dilma, perhaps Rav Yehuda. Maybe the Mishnah is opposite of Yehuda. Maybe the whole point of the Mishnah is to teach us that you're only not allowed to do a lechatchila. But b'diavad it would work. Like the opinion of Rav Yehuda answers the Gemara. Lo salga daitach, don't say that. The Gatani cherish domi the sheit v'katan. Ma sheit v'katan devan amiloi. Cherish devan amiloi. Because we equate, it's one statement. Cherish sheit v'katan. So just like a sheit v'katan b'diavad ex post facto it doesn't work, so too is it din by a cherish. Ask the Gemara, 1 minute, how do you know? Maybe it's not all the same din. Maybe cherish, sheit v'katan are 3 separate dinim, and perhaps when it comes to cherish b'diavad it would work. Answers the Gemara, Midikani Seifa, Rav Yehuda Machshaber Katan. What did the Seifa say? Comes along Rav Yehuda, a katan, a minor is kosher. Mechlal Dereisha, Lav Rav Yehudi. So it can't be Rav Yehuda, and the whole invention, the whole suggestion of the Gemara 4 lines above was that it's Rav Yehuda, and it's only a din lechatchila. But the fact that the Seifa says Rav Yehuda clearly hones in that the Reisha cannot be Rav Yehuda. Answers the Gemara, what do you mean? Well, Damakul Rav Yehudi. Perhaps the entirety of the Mishnah is indeed Rav Yehuda. Midami, so the Gemara says it can't be. Midami Reisha Lipsula V'Seifa L'Ksheira. It can't be. How can it both be Rav Yehuda? The beginning says that a katan is puzzle, and Rav Yehuda says it's kosher. So how can the whole Mishnah be Rav Yehuda? It's a stira. It's contradictory. Is a minor kosher or puzzle? Answers the Gemara. Wait, answers. I should say it's a question. But Doma Kula Rav Yehudi Tregam Nikatan. Maybe it's all Rav Yehuda on two types of minor. Two types of minor that the Mishnah is talking about. And this word's missing. Everyone can read the Megillah aside for a but man, these are the words we're adding in. When is this said? A little kid. Why? So maybe that's the progression of the Mishnah. The first part of the Mishnah says it's no good, it's a little kid, it didn't reach chinuch yet. But then the Mishnah continues and says, but if he reached chinuch, then it would work. It would even work l'chatchila, according to Rav Yehuda. Ask the Gemara 1 second, or again answers. But my kim to Rav Yehuda di'avid. So what are you saying? That the Mishnah is like Rav Yehuda, and it is b'di'avid. Elaha detani Rav Yehuda b'reid Rav Shimon ben Pazi cher shamadav Rav Yishamei. Actually, you know what? We're gonna pull up right over here. We're gonna pull up at the moment we're saying that the Mishnah could be Rav Yehuda, and there's two types of katan. The first part of the Mishnah is a katan that did not reach chinuch. The second part of the Mishnah is a katan that reached chinuch. If he did not reach chinuch, he cannot read. If he reached chinuch, Rav Yehuda says he could read, and we'll pick it up from here. B'siyata d'shmaya in the next shir.